Welcome back to the Northern Sentinels podcast. I'm your host, Chris Ayotte. This is my 50th episode, and I want to thank you for your support. Whether you've been part of this journey from the start or are new to the show, I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen to stories that educate and inspire people to do something bigger than themselves. This is the last episode before a 2025 summer break, and I will be thinking about how to evolve the NSP for the future. On this episode, I'm joined by Canadian fighter pilot and F-35 expert Billy Flynn. Billy and I have not known each other long, but our lives have crossed at several points. Billy grew up in a military family where both parents served. Unclear if it was nurture or nature, but Billy wanted to be a pilot from a young age and ended up as the first newbie pilot to fly the CF-18 Hornet in the mid-1980s. Billy's career was split between fighter pilot duties in Canada and being a test pilot in the US. His career culmination point was leading a Canadian fighter squadron into combat in 1999 during the NATO bombing campaign in Kosovo. At the completion of that operation, Billy retired from the Canadian military and found himself in the test pilot world, with most of his next chapter being spent on the F-35 program. Thank you again for supporting the show, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with Billy Flynn. Hey, Billy, two welcomes. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show, I guess, which is great. But also, I think it's welcome back to Canada, because I think you recently moved back full-time back to Canada.
Well, Chris, thanks. I really enjoyed our first conversation some time ago. You really did a great effort leading into the election of getting focused, everybody focused on defense and security issues. I'm back more and more in Canada these days. Summers at a cottage and winters skiing. And I like four seasons. And for the many decades I was outside of Canada, I missed all that. And now in my failed retirement, I really am enjoying the best part of the four seasons of being back in Canada. I love that. I was gone for well over 2 decades out of the country working, and my Canadian accent got worse and worse the longer I was out of the country. I sounded more and more Canadian, after decades in Texas and outside of North America. So go figure. Now my accent belongs where it should be.
Was that ever pointed out to you? I mean, one of the things that
absolutely
I found working with the Americans, they're like, you don't sound like a Canadian.
No. In Texas, you start talking, and 2 minutes in, some guy looks at you and goes, "You aren't from around here, are you?" It's like, yeah, sorry. It's funny. We'll get into it. Being a foreigner really became a plus, especially in the American corporate world, because I understood small countries, because I'd lived in Europe and I understood the non-American side of conversations. And that really helped the cultural divide when you're working in big projects, understand the subtleties of being non-American. And I know we'll get into the Canadian versus American stuff later on.
Yeah, I'm just going to make a note on that, because that's an interesting point that we can certainly turn into. So you're up at a cottage right now. I mean, did you grow up as a kid going to cottages?
I did. So part of my origin story is my mother is from Timmins. My father from a small town called Smiths Falls between Ottawa and Kingston, and you would know it probably driving back and forth over the years. My father grew up at a cottage on the big Rideau Lake. So everyone that's from Ontario knows the Rideau Lake system that goes from Ottawa to Kingston. And in the biggest of those lakes, my dad had a cottage there. He grew up there. I grew up there. Our kids have been there over the many years. And so I lived that amazing cottage life as a family. The end of last day of school, no matter where we lived, on what base, we drove. Mom put us in the car, and there's 3 of us, and drove to the cottage. We stayed there until Labor Day weekend and went back. Our friends at our cottage and our life were separated from wherever we were. My dad was posted, and I grew up that amazing part of cottage life. It stuck with me my whole life. We have a cottage now in Tobermory. For the people that don't know it, it's the point where Lake Huron joins Georgian Bay, and it's an extraordinary part of Ontario. And look, I get up in the morning now and work out in a paddleboard or swim in the water that's crystal blue, and it's just an amazing part of North America. I call it almost like a blue zone. And I think cottage is just such a special part of the existence that really is unique to Ontario, Quebec, maybe parts of Manitoba, kind of the upper states of the Northeast. It's really that central area where, kids finish school and they go to the cottage for the summer and they come back to school in the fall. And so, a long-winded answer, I'm at the cottage and I'm loving it.
So you mentioned your mom's from Timmins, from Northern Ontario. I mean, what did her family do? What's the sort of background of her roots?
Her father owned a lumber mill, and her mother died when she was 5. Her father died when she was 15. She was raised by an aunt. Back in the day, my mother still doesn't really eat green vegetables, because back in the day they root vegetables and they canned everything, and they never had fresh fruit or vegetables except for what grew in the very short season in Timmins, Ontario. My mom joined the military right out of high school. She says that everybody in Timmins either went to be a school teacher and a nurse. She didn't want to do those. She'd never been to a big city, never really left Timmins, and went to a recruiting center someplace and joined the military. And she was a corporal, phys ed instructor. She was a good athlete, and she joined the military and ended up in Baden and CFB Baden-Soligen, Baden back in the day. And my dad grew up in Smiths Falls. His father was a railroad conductor, and back in the day, that was the equivalent of an airline pilot. His father died when he was 18, and so he didn't know where he was going to go in life, and didn't have any family in the military. I don't know, decided he wanted to go join the military and be a pilot. And he joined the military, left his small town of Smiths Falls, and became ultimately a fighter pilot, and ended up in Baden on base on CFB Baden-Soligen. That's where they met. My parents met in church. My dad sung in the choir. Got married back in the day. Non-commissioned people couldn't be married to commissioned officers, so my mom had got out of the military. Got out of the military as a corporal. My dad was a flying officer back in the day, and he flew Sabres there. And I'll continue the origin story because it gets kind of cool in trivia. When the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, were allowed to have fighter jets, they were given F-86 Sabres built by Canadair in the day, so Canadian Sabres F-86s. And the training squadrons were in the north of Germany, and it was a half Canadian, half German Air Force training unit. And my father went there as his second tour. And then the equivalent of Top Gun back in the day was a weapons squadron, if you will. And my dad joined that. His boss was a man named Erich Hartmann, the greatest ace of all time, 352 kills in World War II, 10 years as a POW with the Soviets at the end of the war. And he was my father's boss. And when I was born, as the firstborn, and most importantly, the firstborn son, Erich Hartmann came over to the house and drank a bottle of schnapps with my dad to celebrate. Because back in the day, by the way, the women were in the hospital having children, and the men weren't there way back that many decades ago. And so, Erich Hartmann came over and shared a bottle of schnapps to celebrate my father's firstborn son. And then my parents repatriated. My dad was a fighter pilot, so I grew up on bases like Chatham and Saint-Hubert when it was a base not linked to Montreal. I grew up in Bagotville, later lived in Downsview. I knew the existence of a base brat as you did. And I celebrate that. And I'll continue to say one of the things I thought was so amazing is that in the it's hard for people to understand, it's a postage stamp site placement for every at least fighter base. There's a Protestant church and a Catholic church. There's a Protestant school and a Catholic school. There's a couple baseball diamonds. There's a curling rink. There's a hockey rink. There's a gymnasium that has the same floor plan in every single base you've ever been at. Bowling alley. There's a theater. There was a snack bar. There's a pool. There's upstairs is the big gymnasium, and I forget what would have been downstairs. And oh, by the way, it's essentially
Squash courts, probably.
Now there'd be squash courts. And, everything was free, right? So I have a younger brother. We played hockey. It was free. My sister did figure skating. We all went to church on Sundays. You walked to the church. Everything about being at the gym was free or in the pool. And many years later, I ended up in Toronto where, oh, by the way, hockey cost a ton of money and pools weren't free and access to those recreation centers just didn't happen. And I realize now how blessed we were to grow up in communities. Oh, by the way, you walked to school. You didn't have fences. Everybody took care of everybody else's kids. You played in the woods around the bases where we lived. And it was just an extraordinary environment to grow up in as a kid. Everything was safe and everything was accessible. And years later, I came to appreciate just how blessed that upbringing was.
You must remember John O'Grodnick Hockey School in Cold Lake. Do you remember that?
Well, I never lived in Cold Lake, so I don't know that.
Well, I thought when you were there when you were posted there, but yeah. So John O'Grodnick, this is when I was learning how to play hockey. John O'Grodnick was a base brat. He had been a kid in Cold Lake. This was, so I think I went to the hockey school in the early 80s, but he was playing for the Red Wings at the time. He used to bring up a couple of guys from Detroit and run a hockey school in the summertime in Cold Lake, in the middle of nowhere, right? And it was amazing. And I thought, oh, this is normal. And then we got posted to Ottawa. And I'm like, so where are the NHLers that are running the hockey school in the summertime? Yeah. Who's this weirdo who's thinking that the NHLers are going to come and teach hockey school? But yeah, I think I couldn't agree more with your assessment. I mean, you could literally be dropped into any base blindfolded and having never been there, just navigate your way around. I'm wondering, Billy, in your experience with the Americans, I mean, there's less and less of sort of our experiences as space brats. How do the Americans approach it? Like, what's their sort of family support, just in terms of to kind of compare and contrast?
Two things, and I'll get to that. Your father was a fighter pilot, so was mine. My only exposure to the adult working life was the fighter world, was the pilot world. And I assumed that everybody socialized together, that everybody hung out, during work, obviously, but after work. I assumed that everybody loved their job just like pilots did. And it wasn't until I grew up that I went, oh no, the whole world didn't grow up this way. They were people that respected and trusted each other in everything that they did, because obviously it carried over from work to the social life. And it was just an amazing way to view the world. That work was something that they were so passionate about that it consumed them. And it really was an infection that carried me for a long, long time. How do Americans do things? I've been around fighter squadrons, and I obviously flew on exchange for many years. I don't think they had the tight-knit communities that they lived in, because often they lived in really nice places like San Diego, California, Virginia Beach, and I don't know, Hawaii in some cases. Right. They didn't live in the middle of nowhere like we did. But I think they had the same kind of support, sometimes more overtly orchestrated. They'd force the wives to do things together. They would force the squadrons to do stuff together. But when bad things happened, when tragedy happened, my experience with the guys that I flew with was they all came together much like we did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's different, by the way. So Canadians, Americans, maybe even Brits would be different than my experience with the Dutch or the Belgians or the Danes as examples, where they really didn't have that tight military community like you were asking me about. In the Netherlands, they live in in whatever local towns. They probably don't move around the country like we did, and so they settle into a community. And while they get along with their squadron mates and the people that they work with, they didn't have the tight community nature that the military world that you and I know had.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it until you just mentioned it, about how the community that I grew up in as a kid, they did love their jobs, like just absolutely loved it. I hadn't really thought about it that way. And upon reflection, because as we were talking before I hit record, when my father left service, he went to, whether consciously or unconsciously, I think he probably sought out that community. So he went to the Canadian Aviation Safety Board. At that time, it was the majorities were retired RCAF pilots. And then he went to Transport Canada. And it was the same thing. He would come home from work and talk about all of these people he used to fly with that he now works with. So, I mean, there was a comfort in that, clearly, about shared experiences, and they got to continue to fly. I think that was one of the biggest things about this pathway that he took all the way to retirement, is that he continued to fly until he left the public service.
When we meet people now that we're in the military, they always come back to the community. It's not the band of brothers, but it is the notion of the support that they had, the people they grew up with, the hardships that they endured together, peacetime and combat. That's what they miss. And when we talk to people that have moved on in life, they always reminisce about, what life was like and the people that we're with. In some cases, those are friends that they've kept for life. I was so blessed. I was in the military, as we'll talk about, for a career, but I left, and then I became a test pilot overseas in a very tight community in Germany. And then I spent 17 years at Lockheed Martin as flying fighters in a military environment with the same guys. I flew with the same guys for 17 years. We did everything together, and we're still, we will be lifelong friends. And I lived in that community. And even now in retirement, my wife and I, we live in a community where we do, it's a community of skiers or swimmers or a cottage community. And we now recognize that element, that essence of what keeps people going throughout life, is belonging to a group that takes care of each other.
So at what point, where did you do high school?
All over the place. So I went to high school in Colorado Springs. I finished in Ottawa, and I was, my father, I wanted to be a pilot, I guess like a million kids. And my father said, that's great, but you need an education, you need a backup plan. And I threw my name in the hat to go to a military college because it was, quote, a free education, which later on I learned it wasn't free at all.
Every ex-cadet will say it the same way.
Oh dear Lord! I had a philosophy teacher in prep year at CMR, so I came out of grade 12, got accepted into CMR. That's an extra year of military college south of Montreal. And my first year, the philosophy prof said, "Hey, why did you come?" And I said, "Oh, it's a free education." He said, "You need to come see me after class." And he sat me down and said, "Son, you're about to find out that this is not free." I went to mail call as a backup because I wanted to be a pilot, and I spent 5 years in the system, 3 at CMR. I was a mechanical engineer, so I ended up at RMC for the last 2. I am one of the most completely forgettable college students of all time. My marks were atrocious. I played varsity football. I spent most of that in physio, injured with broken leg, busted shoulder, you name it. But, and I will say there's a but to that, I learned some huge lessons in there. I had failed the initial part of pilot training. Your dad flew Chipmunks in Borden. Back in the day, I went to Portage La Prairie and flew a Beechcraft Musketeer, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot. And I failed the very last test at Portage. And And I flew in the morning. I'd had a great practice the day before. There's a lesson here, so I'll tell the story. I went out on the day. I just had one of these world-breaking, most atrocious flights of all time where everything fell apart. I came back. I knew I'd failed, and I got on the phone with my father. I'm in tears. Life's over. I'll never be I'll not even be a pilot, but I certainly won't be a fighter pilot. And my dad's trying to calm me down like fathers do. And in the end, they did a review board and said, look, I'd done good enough to pass. It was just a fluke, and they let me pass. When I came out of there, so I've learned a valuable lesson. I am not God's gift to aviation. I have no astonishing talent. And if I'm going to do this from now on, I'm going to have to work hard. I went into second year mill collar, busted up my shoulder playing football, and engineering was really hard, and I was an atrocious student. And I knew that the only way to get out of mill call was to fail, because otherwise you'd have to pay them back the money. So I'm going to fail out second year, the fall term, and then I'd leave at Christmas and start life over. And I called my mother, and I said, look, Mom, here's, life's bad. I barely passed pilot training. My shoulder is never going to heal, and this is hard at school. And she goes, well, that's fine. You can quit. Yeah, I'm sending you a book, and you read the book, and if you finish the book and you want to quit, that's fine. And the book is called The Power of Positive Thinking. It was written by a teacher named Norman Vincent Peale. It's a 1950s, early 60s era book. It's about mental fitness or mental toughness, and now today I know that there's a lot of it that doesn't work, but it was the notion of mental power, and I read it, and it changed my life. And I sorted my life out. I didn't quit mill call. And I went on to I never got great grades, but I turned things around, and it stuck with me the rest of my life. And that's how I got through mill call. That's how I got into pilot training. That steeled my head space about what it took to be a fighter pilot. I knew that the rest of my life in flying, I could never take anything for granted. I knew that I had to work till the very last day, the very last landing. And I never left any margin ever again in anything I did flying. And I learned, by the way, that all that matters is game day performance, not practices, like in the example I gave where my practice had been great and I failed the test. And I carried that for 41 years of flying fighters. I kept the lesson from that. And then, so I finished mill call. In between third and fourth year, I had nothing to do. And they sent me to Cold Lake, Alberta to spend a summer. And I really didn't want to go to Cold Lake. My father told me it was a really great way to spend a summer. I spent 2 months in the backseat of F-104 Starfighters and F-5s, which your dad flew, F-5. And I sat in the back seat, and I pulled G. I went supersonic on my very first flight in a 104. I had a flight suit with a name tag. I was linked to the 104 training squadron. And for a whole summer, I was a wannabe fighter pilot. I'd go on Friday nights and watch these godlike figures, fighter pilots, come drink beer and tell big stories. And then during the week, I scammed I scammed 50 different flights over a 2-month period and sat in the back seat and watched these guys go pull G and go super fast. And it was the most extraordinary motivation to go back to fourth year military college and realize what I wanted to be the rest of my life when I graduated. And then I went back to mill call, finished things off.
You were a military college student to spend the summer getting backseat rides and fighters. That is extraordinary. That's a different world. I mean, it's a different world.
Oh, and you're not one of them. You're an officer cadet with a little tiny bar on your shoulder, but you got a flight suit. It says your name on it.
It's amazing.
104 name tag and some patches. And then you learn. You sit in the bar, you listen to their briefings, and you realize that, oh, by the way, everything you do in an airplane has to be extraordinarily precise. That if you want this is hard, and you have to study for it. And if you want to come in this world, you got to be number one. The only way that you'll guarantee your existence. And I took all of that through my last year of mill call and into pilot training at Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. I did pretty good in Moose Jaw because I learned the lessons of almost failing. The awards that I've won in my life, one of the coolest, and it's still with me. It was a flying award in Moose Jaw, and it was called the Golden Centenaire Award. And the Golden Centenaires were our aerobatic team from the 1967 centennial year. And part of the award, there's some trophy that I still have, but they give you a logbook, and it's logbook is what pilots write every single flight in, and your dad had one, my dad had one, and they tally up the hours, and they're little thin books that the military gives you, but this award gave you about 3 of them bound together with a leather cover and your name embossed on it, with some pictures of this aerobatic team, and I have it, and I filled every flight I ever flew for 41 plus years in that logbook. It is my entire life story in there. And it's still the most cherished award that I've ever been given. Blue ink was the standard. And when you went into combat, as I did, it's green ink. And I was religious about filling it out over the years. And it was one of those precious things that it sits in a vault at home now, be protected in case there was ever a fire. I could lose anything else, but not my logbook.
I want to circle back to maybe a bit of a TSN turning point. And I mean, I'll make an assumption here. You tell me if I'm right or wrong, but it sounds like you had pretty forward-looking, enlightened parents for the day. I mean, your dad insisting on an education, your mom listening to your desire to quit and saying, okay, like read this and then let's have a conversation. How important were they to, where you are now?
I don't know what you charge as a therapist per hour, but I would end up paying you a lot of money for the therapy of my upbringing, the goods and the bads, because it didn't finish well in my household. My brother and I have spent years and years with the therapy of an alcoholic, grossly abusive, father, and being beaten as badly as we were over the years. But, and I take some parts of the early existence, my father taught me a lot about just some key parts of humility when you fly, about how good or not good you are, what it's like in this existence. My parents were at and my father certainly at every key flying event in my career, from when I got my wings, and in the tradition, your father gets to pin your wings on your chest. He was there for that. He was at the Paris Air Show when I first performed there as a young 28-year-old in the CF-18 in 1987. He was in Ottawa. He was at my change of command when I became a commanding officer. He was in Ottawa when I led a flight past of 12 F-18s over Parliament Hill on Canada Day in 1999, coming back from combat. He was a lot of those things, and those parts I cherish. So he was a part of that upbringing. And my mother was a very grounded person, and she had a real sense of the essence of people, and arguably still does. I should have listened to her so many more times than I did of her advice just on basic things. My mom is a very humble, very simple, wonderful lady, and I should have listened to her gut feel of things over her life. And so I think in many respects, I'll answer by saying those early parts of life, I was pretty well grounded from where they came. They had very humble roots. My dad was dirt poor at the point when he left home. My mother effectively never had a mother that she could remember, raised by an aunt, and her father died young, and she was autonomous and grew up on her own and was self-sufficient. And so much of how she carried her life was, pressed on to my brother, sister, and I as we grew up.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you share that. Is this how people can be so beneficial to our lives in some ways, and very much less so in other ways, and that can exist in one person. It's really hard to reconcile, I think, a lot of times, looking at people who spans the spectrum of behavior so widely. It must be very challenging as a parent as well.
Well, you have to tell me. I'm pretty sure, the conversations we've had with our kids are not the conversations that we had with our fathers in that generation. My boys talk to me like I would never, and I do mean ever, have talked to my father back in the day, which I really cherish the openness that we have. But wow, that was a generation of just hardcore, keep your emotions to yourselves, to themselves, never ever show weakness. And thank God that at least I got over that existence. And as you say, the polar opposites, and I really have come from those extremes of the greatness that you want to hold on to the absolute terror that my brother and I suffered growing up through the years. And luckily we've turned around. My brother, who's a year and a bit younger than me, is an extraordinary man in so many dimensions, and probably smarter and better at overcoming our upbringing than I was, or certainly quicker at it. We both have shared the stories over all the years and the scars, which now make us better people, frankly.
So let's sort of move back to the career. So you finished off, you got your wings, and you just sort of spoken about that a little bit, and your father being present for these events. So how did it work at that point when you're in, was Moose Jaw, get your wings? So how did it work in terms of like where you're going next? Did you have a vote in this? Where did you want to go? Where did you end up?
Everybody knew I wanted to be a fighter pilot. There were very few slots. It was the end of the three fleets, Voodoo, which our fathers flew, the CF-104 Starfighter and the F-5 were pretty much done, and the CF-18 Hornet was coming, but it hadn't arrived. I was picked to be the first baby pilot to fly the CF-18 even before it came to Canada. And it was going to be a trial to see if a young generation could adapt to this brand new airplane, this new generation of fighter that was going to be powered by supercomputers, 2 Commodore 64 computers. And we were representing a new generation. We didn't have any of the old habits of flying older airplanes. Right. And the trial was to see, look, could these young, we happen to be young, but young, inexperienced pilots adapt to this new generation of airplane and learn it from the beginning. And I was the first. And I was told that when I graduated from pilot training, the airplane hadn't even come to Canada yet. And no one knew except myself, my father, and a couple of senior officers at Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. And I was sent to fly T-33s in the beginning, just for something to do to kill 9 months. And no one could understand how the guy who'd done well in pilot training was going to go fly T-birds, but there was a plan. And so I went to Cold Lake in October of 1982. You told me before we started, we were both there on the day the first 2 CF-18s arrived. I was a lieutenant sitting in the grass as they landed. The 2 jets landed. I'm thinking it was a Friday, but anyway, they landed and watched them taxi in. You said you touched it on that those first airplanes, and we were all there. The airplanes were coming, and a new generation of fighter pilots a new generation for the Air Force was about to start. And I rode that wave. I was on the first course. I was on the first operational squadron, and it was just extraordinary. The airplane was a stunning change to everything that people knew. It was so maneuverable. It was so sophisticated. It was a video game addict product. If you played video games that were Pong and Space Invaders, that's as sophisticated as you needed to be. And then we learned how to fly this airplane, and we knew we'd gleaned lots from the United States Navy as they were beginning life with this airplane. But as an Air Force, we didn't know how to use it. We just knew it was amazingly maneuverable, and it had a radar, and we could do lots of tactical things with it better than the other airplanes before. And we learned as we went along. I was on the first course, 2 months in, we killed the first guy, a course mate who drilled himself into the tundra at 700 nautical miles per hour with his head buried in the cockpit, trying to understand the radar picture in and out of cloud as he was attempting an intercept from a higher altitude down to a T-33 airplane flying at 1,000 feet over the range of Cold Lake, drilled himself into the tundra. Most talented guy we had. Well, by the way, a year later, we killed the next guy who got spatially disoriented. And as an Air Force, we were just trying to scramble and catch up. The airplanes were coming, and we were learning as we went. And I went from Cold Lake, Alberta, and the first operational squadron, to then Bagotville, Quebec, because our airplanes were late, because we cracked tails. It's a long story of the design of the airplane. I went to Bagotville, Quebec, and held alert, protecting Canada from Russian bears. It turns out I was the first person sent out to chase a Russian bear off the coast of Newfoundland. In one dark night, my flight lead aborted, and I was alone, afraid, hundreds of miles offshore, trying to find a Russian bear, which I had never found. And then Canada had to take jets to Europe, to NATO, because we had a commitment that we'd set up. And I ended up, my squadron by fluke went, and I was on the first jets that deployed to Europe, to Baden-Soligen, to replace the 104 squadrons. So I went from Cold Lake, where I was based, to Baden-Soligen, CFP Baden, back in the day when we had 3 squadrons over there, and helped grow the squadrons over there. Just a stunning, manic existence of this fabulous new airplane. Everybody wanted a piece of us. Everybody wanted to dogfight us. Everybody wanted to come to our base and fly against us. And we were learning so fast about what to do with this airplane. It wasn't just a better interceptor like the CF-101 Voodoo had been. It wasn't just a better bomb dropper like the CF-104 did. It did so many things. And because a young captain, I was cut and pasting everything I could get from F-15 Eagles from the U.S. Air Force, from F-16s from the Dutch and Americans, and trying to translate them into Canadian tactics for the Hornet. It was, for a young guy, you were just hanging on for dear life. It was fabulous.
I want to circle back to something you said, Billy, about we were trying to figure out how to use it. So to the listener, they're going to say, because they don't know the Air Force, they don't know air power. It's like, well, what are you talking about? It's a plane. You get in, you fly it. But can you explain the importance of figuring out? And I think that this will sort of dovetail into future discussions on F-35 here. But what do you mean when you say how to use it?
In general terms, we imagine a fighter. Well, by the way, most people, all they know about fighter jets is they've been to an air show at Abbotsford or Toronto or, I don't know, Bagotville or Ottawa, and they've heard it make lots of noise and, fly fast. We generally have tasks that we expect fighter jets to contribute to as in defense. One is in the air. We expect it to be able to go out and intercept against aircraft attacking our country potentially, but let's say enemy aircraft. We expect our airplanes to be able to find them in the air and go intercept, either to scare them off, or in case of combat, find them in the air somehow and be able to fire missiles at them to shoot them down. That whole world we all know, because we watched Top Gun Maverick since 1986, and Top Gun 1 and then Top Gun Maverick, in 2022. We kind of understand that bit about the air. A jet goes out and finds an enemy in the air, and then protects against it. That's a whole a trade or skill that takes years and years to mastery. How do you use this airplane? What systems on board does it have to detect an enemy? How do you process what you see on some screen where a radar sees it? And how do you use that information and then in your airplane be able to approach the enemy? How do you fire your missiles? How far do they go? What are they capable of doing? When can you fire them? When can you not? And how do you not go trade missiles so that you don't die? The other part of what you expect airplanes to do is, if like World War II, to go bomb the bad guys, if you will. And how do you do that? How do you fly an airplane? What kind of weapons do you carry? How do you deliver them accurately that you can't go, we don't indiscriminately bomb things like they did in World War II and, firebomb the city of Dresden as happened. How do you deliver a weapon so it hits exactly where you expect it to hit? And that's a separate skill unto itself. And when we bought the CF-18 for the first time, and this will come to F-35, we bought a multi-role fighter, meaning it could do those air-to-air tasks like Top Gun, and it could drop bombs like my link to World War II and if you will, Vietnam. And oh, by the way, for the first time, we had a single person in a cockpit trying to manage those tasks. And we had to contend with the issue of whether a human could handle the workload of all the information that was presented to the pilot at one time, or would they suffer some sort of workload breakdown and potentially not be able to manage the task, or ultimately be overloaded and kill themselves, as, by the way, happened with our first fatality. So two jobs, air to air and air to ground. How do you learn those skills? And then how do you manage it as the humans in the cockpit?
So knowing that this was a quantum leap forward, how did the Air Force prepare for this? Or was it very much a case of figuring out as you went along, because it was such a massive leap forward in bringing this aircraft into service?
The people that were... it was a very deep pool of fighter pilots and Air Force personnel at the time. We had 3 different types of airplanes. We had lots of squadrons, and when we pared down to this new CF-18 world coming, we had an incredibly deep gene pool of talent to draw from. But we also knew that we had to, if you will, steal the corporate knowledge from our allies. And so we had pilots who flew with other air forces on exchange, meaning one for one. An American from the Navy would come fly in Canada, and we'd have a Canadian flying with the U.S. Navy. And we did that with the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Marine Corps, with the Netherlands, Germany, keep going, Norway. And we took these pilots who had had experience in other air forces and brought what they'd learned in other airplanes back to our own Air Force. And then we took whatever we could from the United States Navy that flew F-18s, F-A-18s, as they call them, and learned how they trained, and then adapted those to the Canadian way. And so we understood the massive leap we were making in capability, and that we couldn't do things the way they'd done before. But it was a pretty steep learning curve. We didn't do a lot of it right, and we certainly didn't know how to do the tactical part of it. We knew how to fly the airplane safely, but we didn't really know how to use it until we actually put it into service in Canada and in Germany. And then we found out quickly how you should use this airplane properly.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question? We really leaned on our allies.
Yeah, and I guess it sort of is, it's a springboard into the question about Kosovo, because I think, and you'll sort of correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you've got unique experience in actually having the ability as a fighter pilot, a Canadian fighter pilot, to have actually validated, confirmed the way that we train, the way that we exercise, and the usefulness of that in an actual combat situation in Kosovo. And I'd be interested in that arc and how it all came to be. And then, because we also have an overlap there as well, which is interesting.
And we'll come to this notion of train like you fight like you train.
Yeah.
An old cliche that we've all heard in the military, but it really is true. I took what I had, my experience in the early CF-18, and it really helped me understand that we needed to learn everything from everybody else all the time, and it really opened up my aperture that I wanted to go to these courses. I wanted to learn from other NATO members. As a young fighter pilot, that no matter how good we thought we were, we really weren't as good as, in reality as we imagined. I was lucky. I had picked up 2 books in my life. One, I mentioned The Power of Positive Thinking, but the second one was The Right Stuff, a book by Tom Wolfe, and some people have seen the movie now a long time ago. I picked that book up in pilot training, and I learned about these amazing test pilots at Edwards Air Force Base back in the day, the Chuck Yeagers of the world, first man to go faster than the speed of sound. The man named Scott Crossfield, the first man to go twice the speed of sound. And I thought they were godlike. And I decided I wanted to be one of those. And that book also changed my life, because I pointed the direction towards requesting to go to test pilot school and be a test pilot. And I immediately told my squadron commanders and everybody I worked for that's what I wanted to be, and started down the path, ultimately selected to go to the United States Navy Test Pilot School at Patuxent River, Maryland, off the East Coast. amazing year of flying airplanes. And then I was even luckier to be sent directly to Edwards Air Force Base in the high desert of California, initially for a 2-year tour, which I managed to brilliantly stretch out for 5 years as an exchange officer.
Good for you.
I was never coming home. And I flew primarily F-16s, but also F-18s with the NASA research unit there. I flew for 5 years as a test pilot in the mecca of test pilots, but also the mecca of aviation. And I flew with Chuck Yeager a number of times. I met all these people that are in history books and in the airplanes or in museums. I met them and spent time with them. Scott Crossfield, the first man to go at twice the speed of sound. Bill Dana, the last man to fly the X-15 rocket ship. Pete Knight, who's still the fastest man alive at 6.7 times the speed of sound in the X-15. I met all these amazing people, and I flew on the edge in the world of the right stuff for a long time. And it just fed my addiction to aviation, my passion. I was just so blessed. And I took total advantage of every opportunity I had there as a young Canadian who has no right to be there other than by great luck being included in the big American world of test pilots. I knew I was blessed, and I just had a fabulous time.
So if I just quick question here for context. So in terms of if you were flying back home in Canada, in terms of hours, because I think this is important, versus how much you would get as in the path you took of the test pilot, like what's the sort of annual comparable number of hours you would be flying as test pilot vice back home?
If you were a Canadian test pilot, you would have been sent to the Aerospace Engineering Test Establishment in Cold Lake, Alberta, off on its own, different than the fighter squadrons. And I don't know, you would have flown 100-something hours a year-ish, and you would have done a little bit of interesting testing, probably not truly revolutionary, high-risk testing, but you would have flown some projects that were, I call them cats and dogs testing, little bits of projects that the Canadian F-18 fleet needed or the Canadian military needed. At Edwards, I flew the F-16 essentially full time, and I flew 200 plus hours a year. That's twice as many, and I did essentially only high risk envelope expansion, difficult flight test stuff, opening an envelope of weapons and capabilities. I did stuff that's it's some of the airplanes are in museums now. I did a technology called thrust vectoring, where you manipulated the back end of the engine where the thrust of the engine came and allowed you to spiral around like a helicopter and flip on your back like it's unimaginable without this technology. I was busy doing that as a Canadian, and that was, I don't know, orders of magnitude more dangerous, more interesting, more technically challenging than I would have ever been exposed to in Canada. And so just by luck, not by skill, I was blessed with the opportunity to do these amazing things. Again, for a fighter pilot, amazing experiences I just would never have been exposed to in Canada.
Okay, so you get all this experience. How do you end up then into the Kosovo mission then?
All things come to an end, and everybody in the military, Army, Navy, or Air Force loves what they do and never wants to pay the price for it, but I had to pay the price. So I was sent to Staff College in Toronto. I spent a year trying to slit my wrists with a dull plastic spoon, hating being in Staff College and completely failing to understand the opportunity I was given to study about leadership and combat and prepare for the future. Then I went to Ottawa, managed to be at the National Defence Headquarters and understand some of the bureaucracy while I was waiting to go pursue the path as a test pilot. Once you become a test pilot in Canada, you're branded for life and you'll never get back to the operational world. And over the many years, my seniors in Canada had warned me about this and tried to discourage me from being a test pilot. I went down the path anyway. And then by fluke, I was given command of a fighter squadron, 441 squadron in Cold Lake, Alberta. The mascot is a silver fox. It was a famed squadron with great mythical capabilities and a legendary squadron. I was given command of that completely out of the blue. I never thought I would go back into the operational world. Took over, and it's now the summer of 1997. It turns out that now I'm back in the operational world. You'll appreciate this, but I've always respected people that led from the front. I have never had respect for the Canadian bureaucratic management lead from the back mentality. The Americans really influenced my thought, the way I looked at this. And so I took it upon myself to lead from the front. And it meant I came back to the F-18. I'd been gone for however many years. I started from the bottom as a pilot. I had to earn all my qualifications again, not because I was a squadron commander, but I had to go earn them. And I started as a wingman and worked my way up till I was allowed to lead 2 airplanes, and then 4, and ultimately allowed to lead mass groups of them. We call it a mass attack lead. My squadron, here's the timing. So my squadron in the rotation in Canada, there were 4 fighter squadrons at the time, 2 in Cold Lake, 2 in Bagotville, and every 6 months, one of those squadrons would be the lead squadron of whatever operational deployments might come up. And you kind of worked in a rotation. We can figure out 6 months you're on, 6 months you're off, and then you start working up. And my squadron was in a workup phase. I had a very young squadron of pilots, very well led by the majors. And it'll come to my story of Kosovo, and all the non-commissioned men and women were way overqualified. We downsized the fighter world. We downsized the Air Force, and there were no promotions to be had. So I had corporals who should have been sergeants. I had master corporals who should have been warrant officers. They were collectively men and women smarter, more capable than any technical representative from McDonnell Douglas or any other manufacturer, because they'd spent so long in units specializing at whether they were for electronics or aircraft systems or engines or the airplane itself. And they were incredibly capable and just grossly overqualified. And I had a squadron of these men and women, fabulous maintainers, technicians. And then I had a squadron of young pilots who were learning and really well led and mentored. And over the period of so I have 2 years as squadron commander. We get to a year and a half in, and my squadron's about to take over the lead responsibility for the Air Force. And they're peaking in the training plan that we had. And we get now to the spring of 1999. Things have flared up in the Balkans. There's been civil war early 90s. Things have settled down, but they really haven't. Mm-hmm. And now they're flaring up again. NATO, there's a long story, but we'll say ultimately NATO decides that there's going to be an intervention and not wait for a United Nations solution.
Specifically in Serbia.
It's the Serbs trying to flush out the population of Kosovo Albanians in the province of Kosovo. Well, big part of what was the former Republic of Yugoslavia. The majority Serbs from Serbia are pushing out the minority Kosovo Albanians. There's genocide happening. There's mass killings happening, and NATO is going to intervene. When you talk to former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and the leaders of the time, they don't want to put troops on the ground, and ultimately comes a decision to execute what they're going to try an air war to stop the Serb aggression. And we get to a point where Canada's involved. There's a squadron from Bagotville, Quebec that's already in place with 6 CF-18s, and they're part of the workups to what's going to become pretty clear. It's going to become combat. And my squadron has fit in this astonishing timing that we're as prepared as can be, and we're going to go over, oh, by the way, just as combat breaks out. And I tell a story. There's pictures of me hugging my son, Brett, who was 5 years old at the time. I'm wearing a blue Canadian flight suit because that's what we wore back in the day. We're all wearing blue. And we get on the Airbus transport in Cold Lake, Alberta, waving goodbye to our families. And then there's a picture as we come off the plane in Aviano, Italy. It's an American base north of Venice and northeastern part of Italy. And I'm met by the squadron commander of 425 Squadron and his majors, and they're all wearing green American flight suits. They're ready for combat. But we're in our blue Peter Pan getaway suits. And it's like, it's going to get to what you and I are going to talk about peacetime Air Force in combat. And we just realized that, as they used to say in Alice in Wonderland, you're not in Kansas anymore. Holy cow. And we get off the plane in Aviano and war is about to break out. And it's just this massive shock of scrambling to go, holy cow, here we go. A couple of days later, the first wave of combat happens, night mission. Canadian F-18s are at the very, very front of the strike. And when Canadian pundits say Canada's not a first strike military, I can tell you that 26 years ago, Canadian F-18s were at the very front of the first strike into combat.
So I'm just curious, so how was this? Do you know if when the decision was made, like what were the factors that drove the decision to commit to this? And then, as you're feeding all of this information back into the system, what the reaction was? So I'm not really talking about the military operational side that you're getting into, but I'm interested as well in the layer of the political side, and understanding the reality of what these Canadian pilots are now experiencing and the effects they're delivering.
I've been lucky enough to meet Prime Minister Chrétien over the years since, and I actually had lunch with him a year and a bit ago in Ottawa, 25 years after the combat. And he talked about his reflections of talking to Bill Clinton and Tony Blair in the time, Bill Clinton, the President of the United States, and Prime Minister Tony Blair, and negotiating what was going to happen or not on the Canadian side and how they were going to support this or not. And, Chrétien was not going to send Canadian troops on the ground if Americans weren't going to do that, and Clinton was not going to put American troops on the ground and risk their lives. And so there's this involvement. I'm way, way lower down on the food chain. I'm told that I'm going to be sent into some environment at the tactical level. And my job is to make sure that we can execute the mission and, most importantly, keep everybody alive and do it as aggressively, as efficiently, with as much lethality as possible, but most importantly, survivability. So it's a task. And I don't know where the Balkans are. I've never been there, nor does anybody else in my force, men or women. And there's lots of conversations about, here we go. There's really just a bunch of scrambling of, hey, we're deploying overseas. You have to take care of family things. You have to get the military stuff ready. Who's going first? Who's following up? How are we filling out this rotation of people in to replace these people from Baguio, Quebec? It's very tactical, very inwardly focused. Okay, no, and that's how we execute. And when you get on the ground, it's just a mass scramble. There's no rest. It's just astonishing, the pace of things as you ramp up to the pace of combat. I will tell you later on, though, I used to have, I call them all pilots meetings, all officer meetings, where in Aviano, in a big room in our area, I would close the door. I'd have all the pilots, the admin officer, the two lawyers who were assigned to us in the room, and we'd have it out. And everybody would get to ask the questions, very, very pointed, full on, essentially no holds barred conversation. And at the end, it would be me to say, okay, we're done talking. It's sort of, we're here to protect democracy, not practice it. And the door's open. And our job is to go out and execute, period, end of story. And it's very, very hard when you think about all the many individuals to reconcile what you're doing with these airplanes. Astonishing lethality unleashed from a CF-18 from 25,000 feet. When they're 2,000-pound precision guided bombs, that's massive, massive destruction. And so you have to, in your own head, understand why you were sent here, and what you're doing from 25,000 feet. It is a little sterile because you're so far away from it all, but you're not ignorant and not appreciating just what's happening on the ground. And oh, by the way, you're putting your life at risk. I had a 5-year-old boy. I had a family. And my son's as precious to me as any father's looks as their kids. And I'm in some foreign land. It's not my country I'm protecting. It's not my way of life. And I'm putting it all at risk to be shot down because my government sent me there. Every single one of us had to deal with that in our heads. And only years later, I do tell a story of my first mission in combat, and we'll get to it in a sec. But everybody has to reconcile that. You have a job to do as a military officer, in our case as pilots. You carry unbelievable destruction with you. And what are you going to do with it? Can you manage that? Can you keep this in? Can you manage the stresses of combat, or are you going to fall apart? I have seen war fighters, and I distinguish them from warriors. I watched the warriors evolve, and I carried a bunch of war fighters who never became warriors. That's a whole different conversation. I'll tell the story of my first combat mission because I think it reflects how I feel about things. I'm the squadron commander. I've flown a lot. I spent the first week of the war at an operations center in a place called Vicenza, a couple hours away from our base, running the war. As one of the senior officers there, I ran the night war, and then at some point it's my turn to take command and go fly from another squadron commander. And so I show up back at home. The ground crew are mine. It's a night mission. It's dark. It's rainy. It's horizontal rain because it's the spring in Italy, and we're going to go out and drop precision guided bombs. Mass scramble. I've flown for 1 million years. I have thousands of hours of flying, and it's still just a frantic pace to get ready. For some reason, you're just all S's and elbows because it's the first time. And one of the last things you do is you sanitize your flight suit. You sanitize yourself. And by that, I mean you take away all your patches and all your name tags off. You take everything that is personal to you except your dog tags. And in my wallet was a picture of my 5-year-old son, Brett. And I pulled out the picture. I'm sitting down. I'm getting dressed, putting on my G suit and my harnesses and all the things that you wear and to prepare. And I take a picture out of my son and I look at it and I say to myself, you people are not taking me away from my son tonight. I'm coming home to my kid. And I put it away and I, whatever was happening in my mad scramble of all being asses and elbows, at that single moment, it was like a light switch to me. And I just went, I got angry. My fangs came out and I went, time to go to war. And from that single point on, I put everything away. I dressed. I went out to the operations desk. I get my pistol and my ammunition to load into my harness. We go out to the airplane. We do a check around the airplane. You remember your father does. You walk around the airplane to make sure everything's ready to go. It's raining. My ground crew know me. They've been so supportive over the 1.5 years I've been their boss. And they're looking at me like something's wrong with this guy because I have laser eyes and I'm going to war. And I walk up the ladder, strap in, and that's it. I was out to go, out to deliver bombs, kill bad guys. And I couldn't put the emotion away until much, much later, till it was all over. But from that point on, it was all war. It was all business. And it was I just knew they weren't going to take me away from my son. They weren't going to kill me that day. And I don't know, it stuck with me. It was the one part of combat that I really knew that you think you're ready. You've spent a lifetime doing this, and this is game day. And it's about, do you have courage? Is it all fluff? It was all bullshit? Or did you train hard enough over the many years? Did you put in the work? You train like you fight like you train. And it all comes down to game day. And that for me represents, a lifetime of preparation to go, are you ready? Because there's no more bullshit now. You're either good enough or you're not. And it all came down for me to that day.
in your experience in Kosovo, how did you as a collective group then, was there this sort of sharing of these experiences? And I say that because although the Air Force is a team, I mean, it's focused around, especially in the fighter community, that single pilot that's actually delivering the effects, and everybody behind is part of that team. But it's a very different thing from, say, the Army, whereas a platoon, a squadron, you're out there together. You literally can, you touch people, you're shoulder to shoulder, right? You're in the moment in that piece of ground together. And it's a very different thing. But I'm wondering how, at the, after a mission like that, how did in your experience, how do people come together? Do they come together? Do they sort of stay in their own zone or their own lane?
So after a mission, we debrief everything with extraordinary thoroughness. So we come back, we grab our videotapes of what happened. The person who was in charge of the mission, the 2 or the 4 planes that were going, however many went, debriefs it, and you sort of close the door, you review what had happened, you try to learn the lessons. It's very formal. It's very hierarchical, meaning the flight lead is in charge and you talk about what you all did, good and bad. No rank. So you can be a young captain or you can be a lieutenant colonel. You did well or you most likely screwed up. Then you take your hits because you want to learn from it. And then you open the door after that's all over and then walk out to the real world. And it's tough in combat. There's so much energy. You bottle it all in. You've put so much effort. These are long missions. They're hard. You take off it, day or night. You fly a long way. You probably have to get gas. You aerial refuel to start the mission. Then you in our case, got together with, 60 or 80 other airplanes, did this big, huge attack into Kosovo and Serbia, bombed your targets, got back together, exited out of Kosovo and Serbia, refueled again, probably to give you enough gas to come back to Amiano. It's long, they're hard, it's super intense. And then you debrief and you come out of there and now you're just wired. But we're post Somalia, the catastrophe of Somalia, and there's no alcohol permitted because we won't allow military people to consume alcohol in operational environments. So imagine this: you bombed. It's a peacetime Air Force, first time in Europe in combat since World War II, and you're coming back to our hotels where we were staying, where we were lodged, to have a cappuccino or a mineral water. And, that's how you're going to detox and get rid of this. It was just a catastrophe. And these poor guys, I mean, they just need a beer. They just need to sit at each other and laugh at each other and talk about how they screwed up or why they were scared or whatever. And you're having a cappuccino. And oh, dear God, it was so poorly done. It was so very Canadian, peacetime military, not understanding the world of combat. And that lasted for 6 weeks of the 3 months of combat until eventually the rules were relaxed and the boys everybody, ground crew and pilots were allowed to have some beer and alcohol. And it just reminded me just how Mickey Mouse Canadian peacetime military was at that point in our existence.
So if you look back on these missions, I mean, what's something that the average person would not understand or appreciate how complex parts of these missions are? Like, what are some of the most stressful or complicated pieces of these missions?
So there's a task for the military higher up has decided. In the beginning, it's probably in the province of Kosovo to see if we could cripple the Serbian military and stop them from committing the genocide. And when that's not working, then the decision is, we better bomb targets in the country of Serbia. And when military targets, when that doesn't work, they realize that the Serb people really aren't being affected by this. So they're going to have to cripple the infrastructure, the electrical power grid, the transportation in the country of Serbia and make the Serbian population feel hurt, which would put political pressure on the leadership to do that. So we're going to have to attack things on the ground. We've learned in the Western world at this point that the safest place for all of us to be is up high, where people can't shoot at you with bullets. Anti-aircraft fire can't shoot down airplanes. And we'll put ourselves up in the high 20,000, 30,000 feet area, and we'll isolate the risk to us. And it'll be surface-to-air missiles that could shoot us down, but it'll only be a certain type of them. And now the way to safely attack is that we're going to have to go as a group. We're all going to go in one way to attack our targets, and then we're going to come out like a highway. We're going to build a highway in and build a highway out so that we can protect all these airplanes that are going to attack specific targets that someone has orchestrated. And they're going to be very precise targets. They're going to be very, very clear targets where a laser beam is going to guide a bomb to hit exactly where you intend. And now we're going to say, well, how many targets do we want to attack? Okay, and we'll have some number. And who's going to do that? Well, they're going to be airplanes from Canada, from France, from Britain, from the Netherlands, from Italy. And okay, so how are we going to get them together? Well, we're going to all have to amass together off the coast of the Balkans, and we're going to attack at a certain time of the day. Okay, well, where do they all come from? Well, they don't come from the same base. They're going to have to take off at different times, and they're going to need lots of gas because we're going to go way into Serbia. So we're all going to have to give them gas, and then they're going to have to meet at a certain point over the sky, and then they're going to have to attack together, and then they're going to have to come out in a different way. And we're going to have to protect them. So we're going to need other airplanes with them that can shoot at anything that fires from the ground to suppress the risk of surface-to-air missiles. And we're going to do this big whole circus, this dance, this orchestration. We're going to plan this hours ahead of time. And oh, by the way, we're going to plan the attack a day or two ahead of time. So we're going to have thought out all the deconfliction to get airplanes from different bases, from different countries, different bases, take off, get gas, get refueling, to meet at a certain point, to attack at the same time in the same group with the right people to protect them, and the bombers all attacking targets roughly in the same area, to then come out together to get extra gas so they can go back, safely land at home. And oh, by the way, there's 80 fighter jets all at once doing that. That's an extraordinary orchestration of time to very, very precise bombs to do a very precise task, whether that be crippling radio towers or attacking bridges so that trains can't continue, or bombing runways so the Serbian Air Force can't take off. That's a lot of, it's a circus act.
When Kosovo, or at least when that mission, when you rotated out, I'll maybe connect it to something that I think a lot of people in the Army experienced coming out of Afghanistan, which was this sort of post-operation letdown. It was sort of returning to a world that was felt to be very mundane. What's the point of this? You know, this is what I've experienced. I don't see this as relevant. And I've heard that countless times from people in the Army who have served in Afghanistan. I'm wondering if you had a similar experience and what your post-operation world looked like.
So a couple of things. Let me just go back and talk about what the Canadian Air Force accomplished, this fighter force accomplished. I had a composite unit. It was pilots from essentially every squadron. 69 different fighter pilots flew in combat while I was there. I was the commanding officer of a squadron called numbered 441, but I was in charge of pilots from everywhere, and I needed unity. I created or helped create a mascot, a gnarly rat, and we called ourselves the Balkan Rats. And I made everybody, I got patches made and T-shirts and ball caps, and made everybody be part of the Balkan Rats, not people from my squadron or another squadron. I created unity, and everybody in the Canadian military wanted to be part of the Balkan Rats because it really was an impressive organization. We were 2% of the fighting force, and Canadians flew 10% of the combat missions, which is astonishing when you think of all the hundreds of NATO airplanes were there. We flew 10% of everything. And what we flew, we were in charge. We commanded 50% of those big attack forces that I talked about. An astonishing responsibility taken on by the Canadian Fighter Force, this peacetime Air Force wearing blue flight suits at the beginning, became just King Kong warfighters over the course of combat. really acquitted ourselves and showed the adaptiveness of this small Air Force that really could be nimble and learn and react as needed. When it all ends, I came back. It was the end of my tour as a squadron commander. I had this massive letdown that you talk about, because you're just, boy, well, you've been there. The combat adrenaline can't be matched in anything in peacetime, and save all the cliches and the Hollywood stuff. Unless you've lived it, you don't know. And when you come back, it's an entirely different world. And you start to understand why people did multiple tours in Afghanistan. They did multiple tours in Vietnam, because you need the fix, and you can't get over it. And by the way, that's the good side of it. Let's not even I can't even broach the conversation of true PTSD and the damage from that. There is no replacement to it. And how do you move on in life? And oh, by the way, they forget you. I wrote 22 medal commendations for the extraordinary performance of the men and women that I had commanded in combat. And only 3 medals were given. And one was to a senior officer that wasn't a commander. Really, only one of my pilots and one of the admin staff she was fabulously talented also. They were the only ones that received commendations. It was a matter-of-fact, normal operational effort, according to the Canadian military, which again reflected this peacetime military that didn't have a clue pre-Afghanistan. But I won't answer your question directly, but I will say, I will talk about the lasting effect, because 69 pilots flew in combat. And while I went off to a different career path, it affected the entire fighter force, and it affected so many of them. Lieutenant General Eric Kenny just retired as the commander of the RCF, and he was a brand new young captain who flew for me in combat. Lieutenant General Blaise Frawley was an instructor in 410 Squadron. Brigadier General Norm Balfe, who still does extraordinary work on behalf of the Canadian Air Force as a reservist, was a major from another squadron who flew as part of the Balkan Rats. All of these men and women, and especially in the fighter pilot world, they experienced real combat. They're not wearing blue flight suits anymore. They're wearing green, and they're wearing pistols as they walk up to the airplane, and they're going to drop bombs in anger. And they grew up, and the Air Force grew up, and the military grew up, and matured over. Now it's 26 years later. They all went on to do operational tours and other combat related environments, and then obviously the Army in a big way evolved from Afghanistan. I think we all grew up as a military service because we needed real combat, not to take anything away from the generations of before, very professional soldiers, sailors, and airmen, but combat changes you. You can't bullshit anymore, and the bureaucracy doesn't win anymore. When you need something for real combat, people get it, people understand it. I think the military grew up significantly, and Operation Allied Force and the Balkan Rats were a big part of the evolution of the Canadian military.
I think we'll get to the next career path. I would just sort of highlight that you and your team were caught in that time, as you said, right? Not necessarily an operational military, a combat with combat experience. And I dare say, if that happened today, or after the first decade of Afghanistan, it would not have been 3 people of 22 getting recognized in a formal way. It would have been a far higher percentage. So I think that there is a lot more recognition of operational excellence now. I don't like to get into the honors and awards discussion because it becomes incredibly emotive for people. But I think on the whole, the forces does a far better job of recognizing that. You just happen to be in a time where it was not mature enough to recognize that level of contribution and sacrifice.
It was such a bureaucracy. So we went to war at night in these fighter jets without our lights on because we didn't want the Serbs to see us. and my squadron had trained with this, but we had these lights. So in a fighter jet, much like Air Canada, they have green lights on one side and red lights on the other side, and you have white lights like you've seen Air Canada or WestJet have it. And we trained at night, flying these tactics of bombing at night, and we'd been out there, but we had peacetime help. Like we had lights to make sure we could see each other. And then we went to combat. And I had argued for night vision goggles. And I think everybody understands what they are. They've seen enough Hollywood movies. Well, in airplanes, we flew with them. In fighter jets, we flew with them. And I had argued about night vision goggles. And I had said, look, we can't do this without them. I had flown them as a test pilot before, and I knew how to integrate them. And I'd started a project on my own in my own squadron to send some of my guys to get used to them. I had a Navy pilot who flew for me, U.S. Navy pilot on exchange, and he had night vision goggle experience. And I got to a point as a squadron commander. I remember the meeting in front of the wing commander. So I'm a lieutenant colonel in front of a colonel with other lieutenant colonels, and I'm arguing for these night vision goggles. And I had a huge pissing contest with one of my peers, another squadron commander, about who should take charge of these things, because we absolutely needed them. And I made the mistake of losing the argument. Instead of on my own taking my own funds, my own funding from my own squadron, and just getting these night vision goggles, quote, illegally, and putting them, adapting to my airplane, I let the system, the bureaucracy win. And our guys went to combat at night. Real combat with no lights on, not even the green and the red lights and the little white lights on. Everything turned off. It is like driving down the Trans-Canada Highway with your headlights out, hoping that you don't hit someone else as you're driving along or go off the side of the road. And you're hoping that there's enough ambient light from the moon to show you where the highway is, because otherwise you're going to kill yourself. And how we did not die. How we did not kill ourselves just hitting each other, let alone other airplanes, is beyond me. And it is one of my greatest failures of leadership in my entire life, of relenting to the bureaucracy and not just saying, screw you, I know better. I'm going to get these night vision goggles so that people can fly with them. And sure enough, in combat, it proved me I should have had the courage to have done that. And the bureaucracy was like that back in the day. You wouldn't find that now. People would understand operational import. They would understand the imperative of systems. But in the peacetime Air Force, it was lost on them.
So what was your path to leaving the forces, and what was your sort of landing spot?
I read the right stuff. Service. I wanted to be a test pilot. I've been to Edwards Air Force Base for 5 years. I wanted back in that world. And I was offered a chance to move to Munich, Germany, to fly the Eurofighter Typhoon. It was brand new back then. I had experience as an F-18, F-16 pilot, which they did not have that kind of fourth generation fighter single pilot experience. And I was pushed by that. I could have done the career path. I would have been uninspired. I would have been a lousy senior officer. I would not have made it as far as you did. I had none of the skills. And I knew I wanted to go be a test pilot. And so I went to Munich, Germany. I finished change of command out of Cold Lake, Alberta. I left the military, retired, got on a plane and with my then family, and moved to Munich and started a new life. And you talk about
who makes
Eurofighter Typhoon, which was supposed to be this great new fighter. I was going to fly other airplanes while I was there, but basically you hired in as a foreigner, an expat, to come be part of this big multinational consortium program.
Okay.
And you asked me about post-combat. Well, like you probably experienced, and it happened to me, I fell apart. I fell apart about 4 months later when I was all by myself in Germany. All the excitement had died down, and I had to deal with the post-combat aggressive, adrenaline's all gone. And now what's the real world? And I had to deal with all of that on my own. I spent 4 years in Munich, charmed existence. It's Julie Andrews and the Sound of Music. It's Bavarian hills, and it's beautiful. And it was socialism. It was a socialist product. like every Europe, we'll get into European defense products. It was a jobs program. And the technology was interesting, but there wasn't any desire to build an airplane that was lethal or capable. It was to make the companies and the countries make tons of money from the workers being involved in it. The airplane would be good enough. Their militaries and the countries didn't care enough about real capability. And I did that for 4 years until Lockheed Martin won the F-35 contract. Winner take all, next generation fighter. It is the biggest game in history. And I had an association with Lockheed Martin because I'd flown the F-16 fighter with many of those test pilots in my Edwards Air Force days. And I jumped ship and moved to Fort Worth, Texas. I traded Julie Andrews and The Sound of Music for belt buckles, cowboy hats, and the cowboy existence of Fort Worth, Texas, which was, you can't even talk about culture shock. It's just a whole completely different dimension to be part of the big game. And the big game was 7 days a week, build the most lethal fighter in history, be part of a cadre, as it turned out, extraordinarily talented test pilots, engineers, and scientists, and I spent 17 years in that world.
So, did you go when Lockheed won that? I guess, a project of record. Did you go like, okay, I need to be part of that? Did somebody come looking? Like, sort of, how was that connection
I needed
made?
to be part of it. And we all knew the test pilot world is very small, just like the Canadian military is very small. And I reached out to people that I'd worked with before, put in my request to come back. I thought I had a unique skill set because I'd flown the Eurofighter Typhoon, which was not going to be the same airplane, but gave me experience with a different advanced airplane. And most importantly, I came with a multinational background. Eurofighter is built by 4 nations, Germany, Britain, Spain, and Italy, and I'd worked in those 4 countries, and I understand the cultural experiences, and that I knew that was going to matter in this, what was going to be a multinational F-35 program, and I thought that skill set was unique. It turned out to be really a plus over the many years in Eurofighter. In F-35 and at Lockheed Martin. So that's what brought, I wanted to be part of it. I knew it was the big game in town.
So you're a test pilot. There's no plane at this point, right?
No.
So what does one do as a test pilot when there's no plane?
So as it turns out, when I came across, I joined a team to work on a unique F-16 that was being built for the United Arab Emirates, the most advanced of the F-16 fleet ever designed, and I worked that for a number of years. From the very beginning of that program till it matured. And then F-35 came along. It gave me a chance to mature my skills as a test pilot. I'd done lots in the military, especially at Edwards Air Force Base, but I really didn't know that. I didn't know what I didn't know, which was that being a test pilot's far more than what I'd done as a military guy. So I was lucky enough to work on my skill set. And I was given a very special program. So thanks for letting me lead into this. I was seconded for 2 years to a research program, and the system, it's called automatic ground collision avoidance. And I'm guessing you've heard of the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works company. It's the company it's the part of Lockheed that built, the F-104, but the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71, the F-117 stealth fighter, and I was part of a Skunk Works team. So a tiny team of experts, and I was put together with other agencies to mature a technology that would stop aircraft from hitting the ground. And this technology would take over control of an airplane when, for some reason, the pilot didn't react and the airplane was going to crash into the ground. It would take over from the pilot and fly the aircraft safely away from the ground. Automatic collision avoidance system. And our job was to take technologies that have been around for 20 plus years and mature them and actually get it into real airplanes in service. And we were part of it was really 2 years I worked on with these amazing scientists, engineers, and test pilots, and we matured the technology. that eventually went into the F-16 and went into the F-22 Raptor and to the F-35. And the record now, however many years later, is that we have saved 13 F-16s and 14 F-16 pilots. Do that math. That includes a two-seat F-16. We've saved F-22s and F-35s. And it is a technology that ultimately will prevent every airplane from ever hitting the ground again. In the Canadian Air Force, of the 16 fatal CF-18 crashes, 7 of them would have been saved by this technology had we had it in place. And it is groundbreaking, the most important contribution to flight safety in more than 50 years. And I was so blessed to have 2 years to be part of this amazing team that came up with this technology that has really changed, ultimately will change the face of aviation. And then I went on to F-35. But I got this very special 2 years with these amazing men and women that, again, changed the face of aviation.
So when was your first flight in an F-35? And what was that like? And if we can tie it back to your sort of experience first in the F-18 with that sort of leap forward, with all your experience now, what's that like in the first...
I wanted to fly the Marine Corps version of the 3 types of F-35s, one that flies and takes off normal runways, one that replaces the Harrier jump jet. That one version is for the United States Marine Corps that would hover in place, take off and land on short runways. And then another version that would take off from a big American aircraft carrier like Tom Cruise in the Top Gun movie. I wanted to fly the Marine Corps and the Navy version, so I was posted to Tucson River, Maryland. It's east of Washington, D.C. on the Chesapeake Bay. I still have our home still there. And I wanted to be part of that. And I ultimately flew a B model, so that Marine Corps version was my first flight. I'd spent just hundreds and hundreds of hours in simulators, way too many years of meetings. And I will say that my first flight was like pretty anticlimactic in terms of, well, I mean, it actually had real thrust. I felt the engine, accelerate down the runway. But the simulators are so flawless in this day and age. The airplane flew like the simulator did. And it was not lost on me, all the struggles to get to that point, to have the opportunity to fly this airplane. And there were lots. I appreciated every part of the effort of so many people to enable me to be able to fly it. But, it wasn't super thrilled. It wasn't eye-opening. It was like, okay, it flies like the sim, and it does pretty interesting things, but okay, that's it. It wasn't until I got on to the real testing at Tucson River, Maryland, where we expanded the envelope of the airplane, meaning it made it go faster, made it pull more G, made it fly more aggressive, ultimately firing missiles and dropping bombs from it, that you get to see the real capability of the airplane. The first flight wasn't that eye-opening though.
So now you're testing it, and as you said, you're pushing the envelope on this, and we already talked about this, Billy, and people may not have heard the pre-thorough election short that we did, and I would certainly encourage them to go back and have a listen on that. But let's rewalk a little bit of that ground in terms of this aircraft compared to other options, the capability, because that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about the capability that this aircraft provides Canada. Can you maybe sort of give us a bit of a sense who is a taxpayer, Canadian taxpayers, like, why is this a good investment for us? What is the capability going to give us in terms of defense security?
Yep. 40 years ago, Canada bought an airplane to protect its skies and to be able to project the force that Canada needed to support alliances like NATO. So air to drop, we talked about it, air-to-air protection and dropping bombs and attacking on the ground 40 years ago. And the next generation comes along and it's going to do those things, but it's going to have to do more. We're going to need an airplane in the future that is going to be able to connect to the satellites to protect Canada, not just close in, but way far out. We're going to need an airplane that can integrate with all the other alliance aircraft so that they can communicate together and be effective against even more sophisticated threats. We're going to need an airplane that can surveil and do reconnaissance to protect our territory, to see further out in Canada's case in the Arctic. So we're going to need an aircraft that has that kind of capability. I talked about multi-role for the CF-18. It did air-to-air missions, Top Gun Maverick kind of stuff, and air-to-ground, like we talked about in Kosovo. It did different roles together. But what we wanted to buy into was a multi-mission airplane. It did fighter stuff, Tom Cruise, Top Gun. It did able to attack on ground, but now with really sophisticated weapons for this day and age. And then we needed an airplane that could do intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. We needed an airplane that could do spectrum. Well, it could protect itself from aircraft that tried to jam its signals, and could it jam back and protect against that. We needed to do more than just drop bombs and do that. And we needed it to survive in the modern world. And part of the element of the next generation airplanes was they had stealth involved in them. You couldn't see them on radar, and they would be nearly impossible to detect. Not invisible, but nearly impossible. And that's the evolution that came with the fifth generation of fighters. First with the F-22 Raptor built for the United States Air Force, but everything that was learned in that was then put into the F-35. And then we needed an airplane that could see everything. And I needed to be able to see it all in a cockpit and not be overtasked or overwhelmed with the workload of trying to understand what my airplane could see. And the technology that comes with that is called sensor fusion. It allows the pilot the sophistication of algorithms to synthesize everything that the airplane sees and other airplanes see, fit into a single airplane, and let me understand it in a single, simple display. And that's what this F-35 promised. It was a winner-take-all program, biggest defense program in history, and like happens in everywhere, the people overpromised and underdelivered. It was technologically incredibly difficult to mature these technologies and deliver what was promised to everyone. It was going to take way longer than was promised, and it was going to be way harder in terms of people and intellectual capability to develop the technologies. And sure enough, that proved to be true. And it gained a whole host of haters along the way. The F-35 is the airplane that everyone loves to hate. But, and the but is, after the first hurdle of testing was done, this airplane is astonishing, and it can fly and see everything in the sky. It can essentially never be seen. And why is that important in Canada? Well, I've been to combat, and we could have died. Survivability was always threatened. And now you fly an airplane as a Canadian out in combat like Ukraine, and they'll never see you. And you'll be able to execute your mission and come home every single time. And you'll be able to fit into a network of air forces that have the same capability. So you all talk to each other. You all have this amazing capability that you learn from each other. You're completely seamlessly interchangeable, whether you're Dutch, you're Danish, you're Norwegian, you're American, you're Canadian. You all see the same thing. You all have the same capability. F-35s has this sophistication that only the United States military had before. It's a spy plane. It's black world. It's super, super secret technologies that the Chinese and Russians will never get. And it allows us to live in a domain that we didn't know existed. We didn't know it existed in the Canadian military. I guess we knew the Americans had it, but we never had it. Now, for the first time in history, everyone that flies F-35 is allowed into that secret squirrel environment. And so we have a capability that no one else our adversaries can't match. Our men and women will fly it and stay alive every single time, and they will be able to execute their mission with efficiency and lethality that we never thought possible before.
One of the things that I think is interesting about this aircraft, that I think the last bit there, Billy, really leads into this nicely, is I don't get a sense, and this is probably just a natural thing as a country that was a little on the anemic side in terms of defense investment, is growing and making sort of bigger swings, is that when you buy something like an F-35, there's a number of implications of doing that in terms of other things you have to have in place. As an example, secure infrastructure. Right. So it's not that, is my understanding, is that you just cannot roll this into, your old hangar lines in 441 in Cold Lake, and put it in a regular brick and mortar building. That's not what you can do. Infrastructure, digital backbone, cloud, in order to be able to maximize the benefit of this, a super advanced flying sensor, you have to have a way to use, share, process, share that data so that you can, not just a pilot can use it to make a decision, but it into the wider network to be able to make a decision. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about some of the other things that maybe aren't apparent to people about what the implications are when you buy an aircraft or a capability like the F-35.
You did a great interview with Dan Gardner about Canada and its our inability to grasp greatness. All right, took that from your interview, and I will want to come back to that. The Canadian military needed a push into the future. And the F-35 is the trigger for that. And it's not just an airplane. For the first time in history, the Canadian military has been allowed into the secret squirrel, the true capability that our not very friendly American neighbors have possessed. It is a capability that is 15 years ahead of what our adversaries have. And the secret of F-35 is the only way we stay ahead of them is to protect the technology. And that is true whether the airplane's in Belgium, whether it's in Norway, whether it's in the UK, whether it's in Italy, and now soon to be in Canada. To support this super secret airplane and everything that goes with the classification that comes with that, it starts from the very beginning. It's the digital backbone. It's the hangars that are specially hardened and created to manage a spy plane. It is every part of IT. It is every part of cyber protection. It is every part of the backbone of it. It's all the communications that network between all the places where this airplane's going to go. And oh, by the way, it's every part of the Canadian military as we fit into the modernization of NORAD and the capabilities to protect North America. It's all the other platforms in the Canadian Air Force, Army, and Navy that are all need to be upgraded. It's the ability to communicate with the future tankers. It's the ability to communicate with the P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft that Canada is buying. It will be the ability to communicate with the airborne early warning aircraft that Canada will ultimately procure. It will be the ability to communicate with the River-class destroyers that Canada will buy. If you hack into any part of that, you're Chinese, you're Russian, you steal 15 years of technology and you get to catch up to us where otherwise you would never be able to match us in terms of capability and quality. And for the Canadian military, we're starting there's no part of the Canadian Armed Forces story that is updated and good, right? It's been underfunded, undersupported for far too long. And the best men and women are doing everything they can with good enough capability. You can't start with F-35 as the beginning of the transformation of the Canadian Armed Forces without gutting everything and starting from scratch. It is said that when you buy a new fighter to the Air Force, you adapt that fighter to your Air Force. When you procure the F-35, you transform the entire military to the F-35. And the Israelis found that out a long time ago, and we follow that example. So you start from scratch. You start from buildings that don't exist in Cold Lake, Alberta, an IT system that's been patchworked together since you and I were in the military. There's no sense of cyber in the Canadian military, not at the level that it has to be for F-35 and every part of our military and defense moving forward. So you start from nothing, and you have to build new infrastructure. And you wonder why the projection is that the cost of the program will balloon to $27 billion now from $19 billion. Well, you're starting from scratch. You're starting from no IT, no cyber. Buildings that start from beginning that have to be built entirely from scratch to the specifications that the U.S. State Department will have to ultimately certify, not whatever we did in Canada before. And ultimately, when you're done, you have a military that can move forward, that is ready to live in the world of truly the 21st century, and triggered by this 5th generation fighter. F-35 is the trigger for it all, not because of F-35. It's just the start of it.
So in terms of sequencing, so before we take possession of these aircraft, we have to prove and have certified that we have all of the right pieces in place that are going to protect the technology, the intellectual property. Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. Ultimately, it's some part of the American government that ultimately comes to Belgium. It goes to Denmark. It went to the Netherlands and certifies that all the systems are in place to protect the technologies. F-35 is linked in a network so that the logistics of it all, the spare parts and how it all functions and the information that's gathered is all shared together. The programming for how to protect individual countries from the threats that they may face is in case of Canada, is done in southern Florida, the panhandle of Florida, in a combined unit between Australia and the UK and Canada. And all of these technologies have to be protected and have to be at a level that we just weren't used to in Canada before. So yes, ultimately the US tells us how this needs to be done. If you were in Belgium or in Denmark, there's essentially a site plan that says, look, here's what an F-35 base should look like. Here's where your hangar should be. Here's where your technicians training and housing should be. Here's where the pilots should be. And here's what this looks like. And it's like a site plan that you just plop down in place and you build it that way. Well, we don't do things like that in Canada, and we weren't going to do that in Cold Lake, Alberta, or Bagotville, Quebec. So we did things that are Canadian unique, and that means that the timeline to do this is probably longer because it's more complex and not as simple as would have been done in Belgium or Denmark as examples. And that's why we're late, by the way, and things aren't in place yet. Canadian airplanes are being built right now, and they'll roll off the factory line in Fort Worth, Texas next October of 26. And pilots will have been exposed to what the F-35 can do after a 10-year plus hiatus where they weren't allowed to be part of it. And the first cadre will be trained at Luke Air Force Base outside of Phoenix, Arizona, where F-35 training is done for a bunch of the nations. They will become the instructor cadre in a combined Canadian-American, I don't know what the other nationality be, Canadian-American squadron at Phoenix, Arizona, and they will do the training for the next set of Canadian pilots. And at some point, there will be enough Canadian F-35s built, assuming that they've been certified and allowed to come to Canada. They'll come to Canada, and the first squadrons will be built up of Canadian fighter pilots, and they will build the capability to become ultimately operationally capable with the F-35 in Canada, phasing out the, 40-plus-year-old CF-18 Hornet that's beyond tired, beyond its years. There's nothing you have in your house unless your grandmother gave you a cast iron frying pan. You have nothing that's 40-year-old in your house. You don't drive a 40-year-old pickup truck, yet we are flying 40-year-old CF-18s still in the Canadian Force. So they'll be gone, and the F-35 shows up. And Canada has been punished by the 10-year delay of the F-35 saga, which we don't have another hour to talk about. But it will benefit from the most advanced F-35s. It will benefit from the maturity of the product, of how to use this technology learned by the Dutch, the Danes, the Americans, the Brits over the now 10 plus years. It will benefit from the integration in NORAD because all the hard work's been done for the F-35, including those based at Fairbanks, Alaska, at Eielson Air Force Base. every part of how to use it will be a known quantity. And the Canadian fighter pilots and the Canadian Air Force's job is just to integrate it and make it, like, turn the switch on and learn from everybody else. And I think if there's a good side of the saga of F-35, that's part of the good side.
Assuming all those things, certification, aircraft in Canada, I would imagine how you trained and exercised the F-18, we've both been Cold Lake, Primrose Lake, Cold Lake Range. How fundamentally different is it now when you have an F-35 for our training areas in Canada? How does that have to evolve? Again, another layer of the onion that maybe people don't appreciate, that probably has to change in some way, I imagine.
It's a completely different world. So here's your father and my father flew second generation fighters, and they were probably really capable guys. Your dad was, because he taught at the fighter weapons school for a bunch of years, right? He was very seasoned, very capable fighter pilot. And I would have shown up 40 years ago in a CF-18 and eclipsed anything that my father, your father, could ever have done in a fighter. I flew at the Paris Air Show in 1987 as a 28-year-old, and my first move in my air show in front of my father was a loop on takeoff, so right up over my back. As soon as I was on my back, my father thought his son was going to die because he had never seen an airplane that could maneuver like that. We were a completely generation different and more capable than our fathers knew and understood. And now we leap to an F-35, and it is a completely different generation of capabilities than my generation knew. And I have been fortunate enough to fly that jet for 10 years, but I don't belong in that generation. It's a new generation of men and women that think on a different scale. It's not just that they're digital natives, it's what they can do in an airplane that eclipses by an order of magnitude, managing more information in front of them, being more lethal, more survivable, doing the tasks that multiple airplanes could do, all done in the cockpit of an F-35. And that skill set that they have to train to be ready for a fight in Ukraine or the Taiwan Straits against China or whatever the next battle is against Russia, that is at an order of magnitude more complex, more complicated. They have to be more lethal, and they have to be always survivable in that world. And the airplane does that, but you have to train for that. So in Cold Lake, Alberta, so those haven't been there, the Primrose Lake Range that you and I know about, I don't know, it was, I'll say it was 180 miles wide, and it was, I don't know, I'll say it's 80 miles deep. Well, I need 3 times that information. I can see in an F-35 someone 300 miles away. I can see people behind me, beside me, and well out in front of me. And I need airspace big enough to be able to see that. And I need real complex scenarios. I need scenarios that are going to be like Ukraine on day one, or the first beginning of that war, where really fighter jets couldn't survive. I'm going to need that kind of training environment to prepare for what will be future conflicts. So I'm going to need a lot more airspace. I'm going to need Cold Lake or Goose Bay, Labrador kind of airspace. And I'm going to have to train in simulators that can replicate or can create scenarios that will tax me and the people I fly with to manage the information that we see, instead of just relying on the simple training that we did before. I can tell you what you're not going to do. You're not going to fly around super close to the ground like your father did and I did and have a great time like you see in the movie Top Gun, training close to the desert floor or along through the mountains of California. You're not doing that anymore in an F-35. You're not putting your skis in a luggage container and flying to Salt Lake City, Utah at Hill Air Force Base so you can ski at Park City for a weekend. You're not doing that anymore. You're not going on long weekends to San Diego, to Miramar Air Station so that you can go hang out on the beach anymore. You're not wasting any of that. It's going to be very, very focused, deliberate training with the F-35, and you're going to not just do dogfighting like we did in Tom Cruise's Maverick and Top Gun Maverick, or even now against the adversaries that are out there. You're going to have to make it very, very complex and really task the men and women every single time you fly The flying hours are going to have to count. The training is going to have to count, and it's going to have to be super high end. And you're going to have a unique skill set that did not exist even from my era or through the pilots that fly today. I work on a project on that as we speak, where we're going to have to train to this 5th generation cognitive skill set that is unique to this type of flying. A whole new world, a completely whole new world coming.
Where do you see human machine teaming coming in, Billy, in the future? You look at the Loyal Wingman program, Ghost Bat, things like that. I mean, how far out are we from that? Where do you see the human in the loop remaining in air warfare?
Questions always asked me, is this the last time a man fighter is going to exist? And can't drones do it all? And I say to them, as I've said sarcastically to response to Elon Musk one time, not that he would ever read my essay, if you're going to get in, sure, I will talk about drones. As soon as you get into your driverless taxi, you drive to Pearson Airport, you get into your pilotless Air Canada flight, you fly to LAX, you land, and you get into your driverless Waymo and go back to your hotel. If you can do all that, then I'm ready for the conversation. There's truly a place for fighter-sized drones, unmanned vehicles, to be a part of aerial warfare. It's called a attritable mass. It is the capability to carry bombs or missiles, or to be a jamming pod to shut down electronic signals along with us. And it could be one that flies with us, fighter-sized drone, but not a human in it, controlled by us in a cockpit. It could be a number of them with each of us. So you would have 4 of them with you. I would have 4 of them with us, and we collectively would go attack or execute some mission. That is absolutely the future. The head of the United States Air Force, Secretary of the Air Force, United States Air Force 2 years ago said, look, within 10 years, he wanted 1,000 combat-sized drones, collaborative combat aircraft is the term for them, on the airfields with 5th and 6th generation fighters, F-35s and next generation fighters. And everybody's scrambling to make that happen. And everyone, if they don't believe, they should believe that there is really a place in the future for this kind of capability. I want a Loyal Wingman with me. So another fighter-sized platform flying with me 10 miles off to the side that I control, that carries extra bombs with me, that carries missiles or can jam enemy radars or enemy systems to help me get through and survive. I want those with me. As we move forward with that, we really have to contain, it's not, can we build an airplane, can it fly on its own? It's AI. And how do we manage AI? And how much authority do you give AI? And how much do you really have control? And where are the margins for that? And that is such a vexing problem that the smartest minds that I know in the U.S. military and U.S. defense industrial world are struggling with. Where are the guardrails for that?
Yeah, maybe,
but it's the future. The future is drones, not quadcopters, and we all know what the effectiveness of drones in the Ukraine environment. But we're talking about collaborative combat aircraft, and they really are part of the future. In the Canadian military's case, there's 10 years of catch up, learning to fly a 5th generation fighter, and then we need to talk about what's the next generation. How do we bring in collaborative combat aircraft, and where will that technology have? Where's it going to go in the time it takes to adapt to the F-35?
Are you optimistic about the future when you see the sort of level of investment that we're putting in, and we're talking about F-35? You mentioned, a number of the other platforms that are going to be coming online with like the P-8 Poseidon. It seems to me that it's a pretty good time if you're a young Canadian to join the Royal Canadian Air Force. But I'd be curious about your level of optimism or cautious optimism as it comes to where we're at right now.
I'm a very Canadianized American and a very Americanized Canadian. As a Canadianized American, I use a word that doesn't exist in any American's lexicon, and that is humility. I understand when you're dealing with people how to be humble when you're on the American side. As an Americanized Canadian, I'm trying to strip any word of any notion of apologies or sorry out of what comes out of my mouth. What Americans were good at is is striving for greatness. And what Canadians spend too much time doing is apologizing. And I believe in changing that around. And I am a believer in what the greatness of being Canadian can be. Thank God for Donald Trump and waking up this country. For as much as I abhor everything that has been done by him, I thank him for waking up an entire country of 41 million people so that we believe in ourselves. And when I look at this period of time and the generational change that is in front of the Canadian Armed Forces and the Canadian Air Force, boy, if I was a 15-year-old, 16-year-old right now, I'd be heading to the recruiting center, learning what it takes to join the Air Force and the Canadian military, because it will not be the same as the struggles that we've all witnessed in the past number of years. There are so many new platforms coming for the Air Force. Look, it's fighter jets, but it's airborne electronic warning, AWACS equivalent replacements coming. It's a new Poseidon, P-8 Poseidon attack aircraft. It's new A330 refueling aircraft coming on board. It's a brand new search and rescue aircraft coming. It's updates for the search and rescue and the maritime helicopters. Holy Moses. It's wildly sophisticated. If you're a video game kid, you want to be a battle space commander in one of those airborne early warning aircraft. Wildly sophisticated, incredible opportunities. The CDS has made it a goal to sort out recruitment and help with retainment, because the stories are horrible and they're all true. Someone needs to gut that and fix that out. But for the opportunities moving forward for the military, you want to go right now. I will tell you that the worst part of the Canadian military is not any part of the Army, Navy, Air Force. It's the astonishing ineptness of managing the brand and marketing. How can you, with in a world where you're going to fly the coolest fighters in history, you're going to do amazing jobs as a search and rescue technician, truly heroic stuff. You're going to be on the leading edge of the most exciting vocations anywhere in the world, and we can't get people in the door because the branding sucks, and it's ineptly managed and has been my whole career. It continues to be the case. Boy, if you had the opportunities to tell the story of being in the military and being in the Air Force, they should be lining up just like the United States Marine Corps, Air Force, and Army do so well. And we are so hapless at doing that. Change that around. Tell Canadians what's coming. Sort out the recruitment and the retention issues and get people in the door and let them go live a life that you and I loved so much, because it's not just old nostalgia and Bruce Springsteen and glory days. It really is just wildly sophisticated. At F-35, you're going to wear a $400,000 US fighter helmet flying an airplane that cost $100 million. That is the most kick-ass airplane in history. You'll be a King Kong out there every single time. Not Tom Cruise, where you're twice as good as your students. You're 20 to 1 better than everyone out there. And you're going to go protect Canada and Canadian interests for the next generation. Why isn't everybody lining up at the door? It's because they don't know how to market and tell the story. Wow, that's a diatribe, but there's where I go with greatness about, Canadian stop apologizing and the future of the Canadian Armed Forces and the Canadian Air Force. Super bright. What a growth time. Join right now.
I mean, I would love to just leave that as the last thing, but I do have to ask you one last question about, do you still fly? Do you get a chance to fly still?
I don't. I made a promise when I was done. I flew fighters for 41 years. I just lived a very blessed existence with the opportunities that the Air Force and people gave me. I'm a complete product of the Canadian Air Force and the military college system and the fighter pods that taught me. And at the end, my last flight was on an F-35. Lockheed Martin gave me a jet. One of my superiors made sure I was given a jet. My wife was allowed to come down during COVID onto the military installation where I flew, which was not legal. And I was given a jet and said, go enjoy, and don't hurt yourself. Don't do something stupid. And I went for an hour and a half, and I understood that it was the end of 40 years. I understood that, like a hockey player or someone in the NFL, you'd won the Super Bowl and you walk off the field and you don't get to come back. And I went out in an F-35 for an hour and a half. I was the F-35 air show pilot, and I went and did an air show over some lucky rancher or Texas, got a couple air shows over top of his place, legal, but we got an air show. And then I pulled 9G. I went super fast. I did all the aerobatics you could imagine. And then it was over. And I started home. I got to reflect on like a lifetime of just some kid of no great talent being given all the opportunities I had been given. And I had made a commitment that this was it. And I landed. It was just a great finish. I had fire trucks building an arc of hoses as I taxied back in. My wife was there with a lot of my colleagues, and as they do, took water cannons and hosed me down, and then I got to celebrate. The anecdote is a great mentor of mine, retired American Air Force 4-star general who I'd worked with for many years. He pulled my wife aside and said, look, Billy's never going to fly again. And, it's been decades and decades, and he won't know what to do with himself. When he gets home, he'll be like a bad dog, and he'll pee in the corner for 6 weeks. And that was my wife's, the wisdom had come from a mentor. And a year later, we met up with this friend of ours, this 4-star. And my wife pulled him aside and said, you were so wrong. He didn't pee in the corner for 6 weeks. He peed all over the house for 6 months. I was just an absolute train wreck when I finally had to grasp that I would never fly a fighter again, and that it was over, and that I had to go recreate myself and become something different. And it took a long time to adjust to that. And I'm okay. I'm okay now. I live a very deep, broad, amazing life that I never was able to experience in my world. I lived a monk-like existence up in the morning at 5 for 35 years, trained like I did every week. You were in the house getting ready for the next day. You worked weekends, and it fed the addiction that I had. And now I live just a much broader, more amazing, fuller life. I have a dog, and I live with my wife, and I come home and I have normalcy to things, and I've learned to write and read and lecture, which I love doing, and I can never go back. I'm not going to be a Tom Brady. I think of Jaromir Jagr, all of us hockey fans, and remember how hard he worked throughout his career. When you're done, you're done. Now he still plays, but when you're done, and you can never go back. Because you'll never be as sharp. You've lost that very edge that kept you alive all these years. And so with great humility, I'm Bruce Springsteen, Glory Days, tell stories and, over beers about how good I thought I was that I really wasn't. But that's, I have to be humble to go, look, I'm lucky enough to live. I was blessed with great opportunity. And I try to bring that level of excitement when I talk about the future of fighters and the opportunities the Canadian Armed Forces gave me.
This has been an absolute pleasure, Billy. And I mean, I think the thing for me that's, notwithstanding all the things that I learned in this conversation, the number of connections that we sort of have here, I thought it's really cool. So thanks for being part of the program, and thanks for all you did in your career. And it's great to have another Northern Sentinel added to the
Chris,
list.
thanks for the invite to talk today. Our 1 hour chat became far longer. I love the connections of our fathers and how we started all those things, those parts of growing up on fighter bases and all that, and the connections as it goes through. I love the people you bring on. I learn a lot from listening to them. I think so many more people would benefit from listening to the people you interview and learning about elements of being Canadian and interests that should be theirs about what's important here in Canada as we embark on a new world order and our place in it as Canadians. We should be so immensely proud to live in this country. The rest of the world would love to be and have what we have as Canadians. And I think it has been lost on the better part of 41 million people until the 51st state threat came to us. And hopefully that's woken us up. Hopefully it sticks with us for the next many, many years so that we follow through on the investments we need to, especially in the armed forces, to build ourselves up to be capable and lethal like we need to be for the future. Thank you for having me on. I love the conversation.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Billy. please subscribe to The Greater Good on Substack to get this and other content to help you, citizen, better. Thanks for listening, and goodbye until next time.